Now we'll talk about cellular respiration. It occurs in a series of reactions. There are three main reactions that you need to know, and you need to know them in the correct order. The first is glycolysis that takes place in the cytoplasm of the cell. The second is the citric acid cycle, also called the Krebs cycle after Hans Krebs, who discovered it. That takes place in the mitochondria. And the third step is the electron transport chain that takes place in the mitochondria as well. The step that produces the most ATP is the third step, the electron transport chain. Cellular respiration is going to completely release the energy from the foods we eat. It produces carbon dioxide, water, ATP, which is chemical energy, and heat. Cellular respiration has an anaerobic step as well as an aerobic step. The anaerobic step does not require oxygen, and it just makes a little ATP. The aerobic reaction that does require oxygen produces the most ATP. The very first step is glycolysis, or sugar breakdown. It's a series of steps that's going to break down our glucose, C6H12O6, into two pyruvic acid molecules. This occurs in the cytoplasm, and the pyruvic acid molecules will then enter the mitochondria to be further broken down. Glycolysis is anaerobic, therefore it does not require oxygen, and the yield is only 2 ATP per glucose molecule. We'll look at glycolysis in a little bit of detail. The first step is phosphorylation. Think of phosphate. Phosphorylation merely means adding a phosphate group. We'll look at splitting the molecule, and we'll look at the production of NADH and ATP. You're familiar with ATP, adenosine triphosphate, the energy molecule, but you may not be familiar with NAD. NAD plus is a coenzyme that is used to grab hydrogens and become NADH. So basically NAD is a hydrogen carrier. Those hydrogens will be carried to the very final step to help release a lot of ATP molecules. So here we are at glycolysis. Look at those gray circles as carbons, and you can see that glucose has 6 carbons. The first, at the beginning, we're going to energize the reaction with ATP. That is, ATP is going to be used to get the reaction going. And we need 2 ATP because basically we're adding a high energy phosphate group to both ends of the glucose molecule. This activates the molecule. The ATP is activating the molecule. We've added phosphate groups, therefore it's called phosphorylation. Then this 6-carbon molecule is going to be split in half. That's called splitting or cleavage. And the 6-carbon glucose is split into 2 3-carbon molecules. Those molecules eventually become pyruvic acid. There are some other conversions that have to take place to become pyruvic acid. Event 3 is the production of the NADH and the ATP. Hydrogens are released when these molecules are split. And those hydrogens just can't go floating around. They have to be grabbed onto another molecule. So they're grabbed onto, they're grabbed on by the NAD plus to form NADH. NAD plus, once it's grabbed onto the hydrogens, is now a hydrogen carrier. And that's going to go to the third and final step of cellular respiration, the electron transport chain, to help produce lots of ATP. You can see that in this last step here of glycolysis, ADP is phosphorylated, that is, phosphate groups are added to ADP to become ATP. So up here at the very first step, 2 ATP were required, but at this third step, 4 ATP are produced, therefore there's a net of 2 ATP. So the final products would be 2 NADH, the 4 ATP, and 2 pyruvic acid. We started with 1 glucose molecule, and we ended up with 2-pyruvic acid, the NADH, and the ATP. This reaction is anaerobic. Remember, it takes place in the cytoplasm. Now, if the pyruvic acid enters the mitochondria, but there's not any oxygen available, it cannot be broken down further. The electron transport system cannot accept new hydrogens from the NADH if there's no oxygen. So this happens in our muscles when we're exercising vigorously. The pyruvic acid down here that was the result of glycolysis can't be broken down further to release lots and lots of energy. What happens is it's converted to lactic acid. That lactic acid will build up in your muscles and cause tiredness in your muscles, possibly cramping, and you don't get more ATP. All the ATP you get from that one glucose molecule is just a net of 2 ATP. 2 went in, 4 came out. We only get 2 ATP from glycolysis. So anaerobically, there's not a whole lot of ATP produced in glycolysis.